This is The Lone Man on the Ridge, Episode 4, Strengthening the Perimeter. The morning after his trip down the mountain dawned gray and cool, a light mist clinging to the trees along the ridge. Jack stood on the porch with a mug of coffee, watching the vapor rise from the surface. Mr. Rogers lay at his feet, but even the dog seemed more alert than usual, his ears twitching at every small sound in the forest. Jack hadn't slept well. The knowledge that Sarah, Mike, and Dylan knew exactly where he lived weighed on him the entire night. He just couldn't afford to sit idle any longer. "All right, boy," he said quietly, setting the mug down on the railing. "Time to make this place harder to find and even harder to take." He started with the tripwires. Over the next several hours, Jack moved methodically along the most likely approaches, the way he had done countless times during the years on the job. Old habits from his days as a cop died hard. He replaced old rusty wire with fresh, black paracord, tying it to small bells and empty soup cans at different heights, some low to catch ankles, other higher to snag an arm or a leg. As he worked, his left shoulder began to ache with that familiar tightness. The old wound still reminded him of the cost of the badge that he had once worn. His mind drifted back 10 years to that rainy night outside a convenience store. He had been first on scene to a robbery in progress. As he stepped out of his patrol vehicle, the suspect immediately opened fire. Jack was hit once in the shoulder and twice in his body armor. The impact felt like getting kicked in the chest by a horse. He returned fire and the two exchanged multiple rounds. In the chaos, the suspect fired a wild shot that missed Jack completely. 30 yards away, a mother, father, and their small child were running for cover. That stray bullet struck the little boy, killing him instantly. The mother's scream still haunts Jack's dreams. Jack kept shooting until the suspect went down. The man later died at the hospital in surgery. Jack spent 3 weeks in the hospital while Internal Affairs interviewed him several times. The investigation was ruled a good shoot, but Jack blamed himself for not ending the threat sooner. The guilt over the senseless death of that child weighed heavily on him. Less than a month after leaving the hospital, he turned in his retirement papers and left the department for good. 5 years later, that same paralyzing guilt came flooding back in that Walmart parking lot when he stood idly by and watched the woman with 2 small children get robbed and beaten. The moment he heard the children crying, the memory of that little boy lying on the ground came rushing back. He froze. He couldn't move. That moment of inaction became the final straw. Suddenly, Mr. Rogers let out a worried whine beside him. The dog nudged his leg, then barked sharply. Jack startled, blinking rapidly as he snapped back to the present. He wasn't sure how long he'd been standing there, lost in the memory. The sun had moved noticeably across the sky. He reached down and scratched Mr. Rogers' ears. "It's okay, boy. I just got lost for a minute." By midday, he moved on to camouflage. He cut fresh pine boughs and carefully draped them across sections of the garden where the green rows were readily visible. He scattered dead leaves and forest debris across the freshly turned soil. The chicken coop received extra attention. He spent nearly an hour rigging a simple pull cord system that would allow him to quietly shut the hens into their coop from inside the cabin. Later that afternoon, Jack went back into the cabin and pulled out his go bag from the corner. The heavy backpack was packed for a rapid departure if he ever had to bug out on foot. He took inventory of some of the items the way he did every month. First, he checked the medical section, his trauma kit, quick clot, chest seals, Israeli bandage, tourniquet. Everything was still sealed and dry. Next, he pulled out his swagman roll and gave it a quick inspection, and then moved on to the other clothing. Extra t-shirt, a pair of lightweight hiking pants, fresh wool socks, and a compact mylar blanket. In the center compartment, he counted the food: some MREs, a few high-calorie bars, and some homemade jerky. The water section still had his Sawyer mini filter, purification tablets, and a small titanium cup. Fire kit, headlamp, fresh batteries, extra .308 ammo for the rifle, and 1 spare magazine for the Glock 22, all exactly where it should be. While he worked, his mind kept turning over the problem. 3 people know I'm up here. They saw the garden. They saw the chickens. They know I've got food, water, power. This place makes us a target. In the early afternoon, he climbed up on a rocky outcrop about 200 yards above the cabin, a natural vantage point he used for years. He cleared a small area and built a small blind using fallen logs and pine branches. From there, he could watch the main trail and have a pretty good vantage view up the ridge. Old police instincts told him that good observation often prevented him from using force later. As the sun began to dip lower, Jack returned to the cabin and headed down to the root cellar. The cool, earthy smell greeted him as he descended the stairs. He spent quite a bit of time reorganizing the shelves, moving the most valuable long-term storage, the vacuum-sealed bags of beans, rice, and dehydrated veggies, deeper into the back, behind stacks of less critical items. If anyone did manage to break in, he did not want them finding everything right away. He took his time, carefully rotated the older stock forward, double-checking the seals for any sign of moisture or pests. He sat down on a stump near the cabin as evening approached. Mr. Rogers settled in beside him with a heavy sigh. Jack stared down the long slope towards the logging road, now deep in shadow. I spent 26 years wearing a badge protecting other people's homes, he said quietly. I never thought I'd be fighting to protect my own like this. His mind would not get away from those 3 people, especially Dylan. He could see the rage in the man's eyes the moment the shotgun blast hit him. The way Dylan had screamed and cursed as they retreated down the ridge, that was the kind of hate that just didn't fade away. Dylan's gonna come back, Jack muttered. He's not the type to let things slide. He'll tell himself that I had no right to stop him. He'll twist it in his head until he believes he's the victim, and then he'll come looking for payback. He paused, running a hand across his face. The real question is whether Sarah and Mike will try to talk him out of it, or if they're too scared to say anything. From what I saw, Dylan's running that little group, and men like that normally don't travel alone when they want revenge. They gather others. Mr. Rogers let out a low whine, sensing the tension in Jack's voice. Jack looked down at the dog. Yeah, boy, I know. I'm worried too. This cabin, these 75 acres, this was supposed to be our safe place. Now it feels like we have a target painted on our backs. He sat there in silence for a long time as the last of the light disappeared from the sky. His mind worked through every possible approach, every weak point in his defenses. The southern drainage ditch, the blind up on the ridge, how he'd handle if they came in the middle of the night. The weight of 5 years of peaceful solitude now felt very heavy. 5 years ago, I built this place to be invisible, Jack said softly, almost to himself. Now it feels like a beacon. He stood up slowly, his shoulders stiff and aching, and looked out over his land one last time. Tomorrow I'll finish the southern approach. After that, we're just going to have to see what happens. Jack went inside the cabin and warmed up a simple dinner, a can of beef stew heated over a wood stove. He sat down on a small wooden table with Mr. Rogers curled up at his feet. The only sounds was the soft crackle of fire and the occasional hoot of an owl outside. As he ate, his mind would not stop. Just a few days ago, his biggest concern was making sure his garden stayed watered and the chickens stayed safe from foxes. Now he was thinking about defensive perimeters, tripwires, and whether 3 desperate people were planning their return. He looked over at the corner where his rifle leaned against the wall next to his Remington 870 shotgun. The same shotgun he'd used to stop Dylan just a few days earlier. Weapons he'd hoped he'd only have to use for hunting. Not this. I never wanted this again, he said quietly. Meanwhile, just a few miles away in town, Dylan and his friends were already moving. The preparations that Jack made were about to be tested. This has been The Lone Man on the Ridge, Episode 4, Strengthening the Perimeter.